He sent me the listing while I was still at the funeral reception. I had a plate of cold butter tarts in one hand and my phone in the other, and the notification came through at 4:37 p.m., 12 hours after we buried my mother. The subject line said, FWD. Estate Asset, Storage Unit 14B, Pemberton Industrial Park. My brother had already CC'd his real estate lawyer. I stood there between the folding tables and the sympathy flowers and read the email twice. He wasn't asking, he was informing. The storage unit, the one my mother had paid for every month for 11 years, the one she had never once let him go near, was being flagged as a liability on the estate. He wanted it cleared out and sold by the end of the month. He was handling the house, the accounts, the car. I could handle the storage unit. It was, in his words, probably just old furniture and sentiment. I put down the butter tarts. I didn't say anything to him across the room. I just looked at him standing there in his good blazer, shaking hands with people he hadn't spoken to in years, and I thought, he doesn't know what's in there. She never told him. She only ever told him. She only ever told me. My name is Mara. I'm 31 years old. And the week after my mother died, I lost almost everything, and then found something my brother never counted on. This is what happened. My brother's name is Callum. He's 5 years older than me, which in our family meant he was 5 years more important. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it the way you describe weather. It just was. He was the firstborn son in a family that still thought that meant something, and my mother, who I loved deeply and without condition, had a blind spot about him that I spent my entire childhood tripping over. When she got sick, he came back from Vancouver. He'd been gone for 6 years doing something in tech sales that he explained differently every time someone asked. He came back, moved into the house, took over her care schedule, and within 3 weeks had positioned himself as the person running things. Mom was exhausted and in pain and grateful for the help. I was already in Sudbury, already driving down every second weekend, already the one managing her medication spreadsheets and calling the oncology nurses when something felt off. But I did it quietly, the way I'd always done everything, and Callum did it loudly, the way he'd always done everything, and somehow loud reads as in charge. After she passed, the estate lawyer read the will. The house went to Callum. The savings account, what was left of it, went to Callum to manage for family expenses. I received my mother's jewelry, her sewing machine, and the contents and ongoing lease of Storage Unit 14B at Pemberton Industrial Park, Sudbury, Ontario. Callum laughed when the lawyer read that part. Not a mean laugh exactly, more like the laugh of a man who assumed he'd won the round and was being gracious about it. He leaned over and said, quietly, "You always were the sentimental one." I nodded. I didn't correct him. What I knew, what I had known since I was 24, and my mother had taken me to the unit alone, without telling Callum, without mentioning it to anyone, was that the storage unit was not full of sentiment. It was full of my father's work. My father died when I was 11. He had been, before the accident, a furniture restorer. Not the weekend hobbyist kind, the real kind. The kind that spent 18 months on a single piece, that drove to estate sales in Quebec and came home with things wrapped in moving blankets, that had a waiting list from collectors as far as Toronto and Montreal. He had a shop attached to our house when I was small, and it smelled like linseed oil and sawdust, and I thought that smell was just what father smelled like. When he died, my mother couldn't bring herself to sell his inventory. She also couldn't afford to heat the shop. So she paid for a climate-controlled storage unit, and she moved everything in, and she paid $247 a month for 11 years, and she never once let Callum near it because Callum had, at 19, tried to sell 2 of my father's finished pieces without asking, and my mother had never fully forgiven him. She had, however, told me. When I turned 24, she brought me to the unit, unlocked it, turned on the fluorescent light, and showed me what was inside. Then she took my hand and she said, "This is yours when I'm gone. Don't let your brother tell you it's nothing." I had thought about that moment every day for the past 6 years. The morning after the reception, Callum called me at 7:30. I was still in my old bedroom at the house, lying on the mattress that still had the same IKEA duvet from 2009. "I need you to clear out the storage unit by the end of October," he said. "No good morning. The estate needs to be wrapped up clean. I've got a buyer interest in the property and I don't want loose ends." I sat up. The property. He meant the house. Mom had been dead for 48 hours. "I'll handle it," I said. "There's also the question of the monthly fee." It's coming out of the estate account right now, and I'd rather not have that continuing past this month. I'll handle the fee too. Good. He paused, and I could hear him exhaling that specific sound he made when he thought a problem had been solved. I'll have the lawyer send over the transfer paperwork for the unit lease. Once it's in your name, it's your cost to manage. Fine, he hung up. No thank you. No how are you doing, Mara? No acknowledgement that we had both just buried our mother, and maybe that warranted 30 seconds of being human beings together. I sat on the edge of the mattress. I looked at the window. Outside, the birch trees in the backyard had already gone gold. It was mid-October in Sudbury, and the cold was serious and coming in fast. I thought about what was in that unit. I thought about what my mother had said. Then I got up, put on my coat, and drove to Pemberton Industrial Park. The unit was in the back row, number 14B, flanked by a unit full of someone's ATV and a unit that hadn't been opened since at least 2019, based on the cobwebs across its latch. The rolling door was orange with rust at the corners, but the padlock was good. I'd replaced it 3 years ago when my mother's hands had gotten too weak to manage the old combination. I lifted the door. The fluorescent light clicked on automatically. Climate control hummed from the ceiling unit. And there was my father's work. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. I hadn't been back since my mother showed me the first time. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. 12 pieces of furniture, each wrapped in quilted, moving blankets, each tagged in her handwriting. Against the back wall, a rolling shelving unit held his notebooks, restoration logs, sourcing records, condition assessments, photographs of each piece before and after. She had kept all of it. She had kept it the way you keep something you believe matters. I watched to the nearest piece and lifted the corner of the blanket. Walnut. Hand-carved cabriole legs, the brass hardware original. It was a Queen Anne lowboy, and even I could see that the wood had the kind of depth that comes from age and genuine care. I checked my mother's tag, COM, 1740s Connecticut origin, purchased Drummondville estate sale 1997, full restoration completed. I moved to the next one, then the next. I am a CPA. I work in audit. My entire job is pattern recognition, looking at numbers and asking what doesn't fit, what's being obscured, where value is hiding in plain sight. It is not the most glamorous skill set, but standing in that storage unit in Sudbury in October, it was the only skill set that mattered. I did not know the furniture market the way my father had, but I had my mother's notebooks and I had my phone. I started photographing the tags. Then I started searching. The third piece I checked stopped me cold. My mother's handwriting. Pembroke table. Mahogany. Cogany. 1780s attributed to Thomas Affleck Workshop, Philadelphia. Purchased Hamilton Estate, 1994. Condition, exceptional. Thomas Affleck. I typed the name into my browser. Then I sat down on the concrete floor and read for 40 minutes. Thomas Affleck was one of the most significant furniture makers in colonial America. A piece attributed to his workshop, genuinely, verifiably attributed, could sell at major auction for anywhere between $80,000 and $400,000, depending on condition and provenance. The provenance question was the one that made or broke these sales. My father had the Hamilton estate purchase records. He had condition photographs. He had his restoration log showing exactly what he had and hadn't touched. My father had been holding a piece of American furniture history in a storage unit in Northern Ontario for 30 years, and my mother had paid $247 a month to keep it safe. And Callum had called it loose ends. I kept reading the tags. By the time I'd gone through all 12 pieces, my hands were shaking. Not because I was upset, because I'm an accountant and I was doing arithmetic in my head, and the numbers weren't landing anywhere close to where I'd expected. The lowboy alone, conservatively, had a secondary market value of somewhere between $45,000 and $90,000 and $1,000. The Affleck table could go significantly higher. There was a Windsor chair set, 6 chairs, original surface, my father's note saying, do not strip, original painted surface intact, period correct, that the auction records I was finding suggested could fetch $30,000 to $60,000 for the set. There was a blanket chest with carved decoration that my father had tagged as likely Connecticut, ca. 1700 to 1720, and noted as his finest find. I sat on that concrete floor in October and I did math for an hour. Conservative total, $380,000. If the Affleck attribution held and the provenance was accepted, potentially closer to $600,000. My brother had the house. He had my mother's savings. He had the car. He had the investment account that I had never been told the balance of. He had handed me a storage unit he considered worthless and told me to clear it out by the end of the month. I locked the unit, drove back to the house, and said nothing. That night, Callum made pasta. He was actually a decent cook, and I think he made pasta because he knew it would soften things, because he needed something from me and cooking was how he asked. He waited until we were both at the table and then he said, "I need to talk to you about the estate account." I waited. Mom had less than I thought. He refilled his glass. The end-of-life care costs were significant. The hospice, the nursing support, there were bills. I've been absorbing some of it personally, and I need to be reimbursed from the estate before we close everything out. I put down my fork. How much? Around $42,000. I looked at him. I thought about the storage unit. I thought about $247 a month for 11 years. I thought about my mother's handwriting on those tags, careful and small, labeling each piece like a promise. "I'll need to see the receipts," I said. His jaw tightened. "Obviously I have them." "Then send them to me and I'll have my own accountant review before anything gets distributed." He didn't like that. He spent the rest of dinner being pleasant in the particular way that meant he was furious, asking about my drive up, and whether I was finding work busy and how long I was planning to stay. I answered in the same register, politely, carefully, giving nothing. When I went to bed, I called my colleague, Priya. She's a senior associate at the firm where I work, and she knows estate law well enough to ask the right questions. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "Document every piece in that unit tomorrow morning. Condition, photography, every tag, and call an appraiser before you say a single word to your brother." I did exactly that. The appraiser's name was Robert. He drove up from Toronto on a Thursday, which meant I had 3 days to not say anything to Callum, which was one of the hardest things I have done in my adult life. Robert spent 4 hours in the unit with a jeweler's loupe, a UV light, and a camera that cost more than my first car. He did not tell me numbers on the day. He said he'd send a formal report within 2 weeks. He called me 5 days later. I was in my car in the Loblaws parking lot when he called. I remember this specifically because I stayed in that parking lot for 45 minutes after the call ended, just sitting. He had confirmed the Affleck attribution, the provenance held, the Hamilton estate records, my father's documentation, the construction details consistent with Affleck's workshop. At current market conditions, he was confident the piece would bring between $210,000 and $280,000 at a major Canadian auction house, and he was recommending we approach Heffel or Cali Abbott for the furniture, and potentially Sotheby's Canada for the Affleck piece specifically. The total appraised value of the 12 pieces was $487,000 on the conservative end. He expected bids to come in higher. I called Priya. She said, "Don't touch the estate account. Don't sign anything, and get a probate lawyer today." I called a probate lawyer. Her name was Teresa, and she was in Sudbury, and she had done estates for 40 years, and she did not waste words. I explained the situation. She was quiet in the way people are quiet when they're thinking quickly. Then she said, "The unit is already in your name per the will and the lease transfer your brother initiated. The contents are explicitly yours under the bequest. He has no claim." No claim. I drove back to the house. Callum was at the kitchen table with his laptop, and he looked up when I came in and said, "Did you get someone to start clearing the unit?" "I'm handling it," I said. "Good. The buyer wants a clean close by November 15th. "I know." I hung up my coat. "Callum, I need to ask you something. Did you ever go into the storage unit? When Mom was sick, did you ever look inside?" He frowned. "Why would I go into a storage unit? That's what we're paying you to sort out." There it was. "Just checking," I said. He went back to his laptop. He had no idea. He had looked at $247 a month and called it a liability and handed it to me to deal with, and he had never once thought to wonder why our mother had paid it for 11 years. He had never wondered what she was protecting. He had never asked. He thought of me the way he thought of the storage unit, a peripheral expense, moderately inconvenient, not worth examining too closely. I need to tell you about the week that followed, because it was the week I understood something about myself that I had spent my entire life avoiding understanding. I am good at my job because I do not panic when the numbers look bad. I look at what's actually there. I trace the flow. I find where the value went and why. This is not a glamorous skill, and it does not make me interesting at parties, but it is the skill that has kept me employed and solvent, and, it turned out, the skill that saved me in that storage unit. What I understood that week was this. I had spent my whole life being the quiet one because I thought quiet meant safe. I thought if I didn't claim space, No one could take it from me. I managed my mother's medication schedules without complaint. I drove 6 hours round trip every second weekend without mentioning the cost. I absorbed the 100 small dismissals and I called it being low maintenance, and I told myself it was fine. It was not fine. It was the same trap the unit had almost become, something valuable sitting in the cold, being ignored because the person in charge had decided without looking that it wasn't worth his time. I was done being ignored. The auction was in February. Heffel handled most of the pieces. The Affleck table went to Sotheby's Canada. I flew to Toronto for the Sotheby's sale and sat in the back of the room in a coat I'd had for 6 years and watched people in much better coats bid on my father's work. The Affleck table sold for $294,000. I sat very still and breathed. The rest of the pieces brought in a combined $181,000 over 3 separate sales. Total after commission, $596,496 review. The receipts Callum had submitted for reimbursement included $14,000 in expenses that were personal, a Vancouver hotel stay, business dinners, his own return flights that had been booked before our mother's condition had materially worsened. Teresa flagged them. The estate auditor flagged them. Callum repaid the $14,000 to the estate before it went any further. But the cost was not only financial. I did not rub his face in it. I want to be clear about that. I am not built for confrontation as performance. But when the final estate accounting was done, I did sit across from him in Teresa's office and I watched him realize in real time what had been in that storage unit. I watched him understand that he had been so certain something was worthless that he had never checked. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know, Mara." "I know you didn't," I said. "That was your choice." With the auction proceeds, I paid off my student loans, the ones I'd carried for 8 years because I'd been too cautious to put money in anything I couldn't fully control. I put a deposit on a small house in Sudbury, not far from where I grew up. I kept my father's Windsor chairs. They are in my living room right now, and they are the oldest things I own, and every time I sit in one, I think about my father driving to a farm auction in Quebec in 1998 and seeing something that everyone else had walked past. He knew how to find what other people had missed. I think he would have been glad I learned it too. My brother has not called since the estate closed. I think that will change eventually. I am not waiting for it, but I am not closed to it either. Grief does strange things to families, and he was grieving too, in his way. Even if his way looked a lot like asset management. What I know is this: my mother paid $247 a month for 11 years to protect something she loved. She did not protect it for Callum. She did not protect it for an auction house, or a collector in Toronto, or a number on an appraiser's report. She protected it for me. Because she knew, the way mothers sometimes know, that I was the one who would actually look. I've thought a lot about what Callum actually did wrong. Not in the legal sense. Teresa handled that. But in the deeper sense, the one that keeps coming back to me when I'm sitting in my living room in one of my father's Windsor chairs on a quiet evening. He didn't do wrong because he was cruel. He did wrong because he was incurious. There's a difference, and I think it matters. A cruel person looks at something and wants to destroy it. Callum looked at that storage unit and simply never looked at all. He made a decision about its value before he ever touched the padlock. He decided I was the sentimental one, the manageable one, the one who could be handed the inconvenient parts and trusted to disappear quietly. And then he stopped thinking about it entirely. That is its own kind of harm, not dramatic, not the kind that makes a good villain, just the steady, accumulated harm of being dismissed by someone who should have known better, who chose convenience over curiosity and called it practicality. What I learned, slowly, the way you learn things that cost you something, is that paying attention is not a passive act. My father paid attention when he drove to farm auctions in Quebec and saw furniture that everyone else had walked past. My mother paid attention when she kept those pieces safe for 30 years on a fixed income, $247 every month without complaint, because she understood what they were. I paid attention when I sat on a concrete floor in October and read her handwriting on those tags, instead of just loading everything into a rented van. Callum did not pay attention, and the consequence of that was not punishment delivered from outside. It was simply the natural result of his own choice. He had decided the unit was worthless without checking, so it was worthless to him. He signed off on the lease transfer without reading because he'd already concluded there was nothing worth reading. He lost $596,000, the same way most people lose important things. Not through bad luck, but through the assumption that they already knew. I don't say this to be hard on him. Grief makes people move fast when they should move slow. He was in pain and he was in debt, and he grabbed at control because it was the only thing that made him feel less afraid. I understand that. I was afraid too. I just happened to be afraid in a direction that made me open the door and look. What I want, if this story means anything beyond my own particular life, is for people to think about what they've already decided is worthless. The thing in the corner they've stopped seeing. The person they filed under manageable. The inherited weight they've been meaning to sort through but haven't because they're certain it's just old furniture and sentiment. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it really is just old furniture. But sometimes your mother spent 11 years and $32,000 protecting something she knew you'd be the one to understand. Sometimes the thing everyone dismissed is the thing that changes everything. My father knew how to find value where other people saw clutter. My mother knew how to protect it quietly, without fanfare, without anyone noticing. I'd like to think I got a piece of both of them. The eye that looks, and the patience to keep looking even when everyone around you has already moved on. That's what I'm sitting with, in that Windsor chair, on winter evenings in Sudbury. Not triumph, not anger. Just a quiet, settled kind of gratitude for the people who taught me, without ever saying it directly, that paying attention is the most important thing you can do for yourself, and for the people who come after you.